Derik Queen of Maryland might have hit a game-winning shot in the tournament the other day, but I'll tell you why he's a player the Pelicans probably need to avoid in the NBA draft. Plus, we're talking tanking in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider Credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Wednesday, and we are talking draft, we are talking tanking, and what the NBA can do to fix it, because look, that game between the Philadelphia 76ers and the Pelicans was about as stinky as it gets, even though the Pelicans won, and we actually kind of enjoyed it and liked seeing the good play from those guys. But we're going to start off with Derik Queen out of Maryland, who I have a feeling is going to be a really interesting prospect in the NBA draft, a guy that overall I like, but I don't know if I want the Pelicans to draft him, and I'll explain why in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. And if you're an everydayer, let me know. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. I'm actually not coughing as much as I have been the past 2 weeks, so that's overall good. So hopefully that's out of the way for the show here. So let's get into it. Derik Queen. You might have seen him play recently after his game winner against Colorado State in the round of 32 in the NCAA tournament. Game that he was fantastic in, and he's been on a very strong run recently. In addition to hitting that game winner, 17 points, 6 rebounds, 1 assist. He was 2 of 3 from deep in that game. Looked really good. Later, when you looked at him in the Big 12 tournament, he scored 31 points. 31 points, 2 of 4 from 3, 9 free throws in their game against Michigan that they lost. Maryland has been good this year, and Derik Queen is a very massive part of that. His per-game numbers on the season, 16.2 points per game, 9.1 rebounds, almost 2 assists, a steal, and a block. He's not shot well from 3, though he has the ability to do so, it looks like. Only 19.4%. Doesn't get any better in conference play in that area, and largely his numbers are about the same. But as a freshman who's 6'10", but he's closer to 6'9", with a very good wingspan. This is someone who is just going to be really interesting as a draft prospect. But here's the thing. I think the Pelicans need to stay away from him. I think this is a player that, despite a lot of the tools, and I see some Karl Anthony Towns in him, I really do. I don't think this is a guy that the Pelicans should draft. You know, when you were to if you were to read like a scouting report on him or a situation like that, you'd feel really good about what he is capable of doing. However, the problem with that is his defense is not great, and he has so much upside, but it's going to take a while to unlock it. And look, there's 3 years left on Zion Williamson's contract after this season. Are you going to go with a bit of a project kind of player at this point? Are you going to go with someone who can maybe contribute a little bit more right away? And look, if the Pelicans are picking in the top 4, I don't see Derik Queen going in the top 4. I think he could be in the mix for 5, 6, 7, somewhere in that range. Like, absolutely could. And if he continues to play well and lead Maryland further in the tournament, you could absolutely see that being the case. You know, his scoring as a big man, his touch around the rim, back to the basket, he seals off his man really well. So he has that kind of traditional post game where he just has a quick spin with the ball, goes up and puts it down. You know, he's got a very good touch around the rim, but there are some things that worry me with that. One, he's a below the rim finisher. So this is not someone that would be any sort of real vertical lob threat a la Misi, a la a Carlo Makovic either. And while, you know, he has the ability to shoot, he has not proven yet that he can shoot. And it's going to take a little while for him to develop that skill. Defensively is where I'd be very concerned. This is not a rim protector. He's a good rebounder. I wouldn't call him an elite rebounder. We'll get into some of those guys in a minute here. Derik Queen has, I think, the movement on the perimeter. So if the Pelicans want to keep with their switching scheme, he's definitely a guy that can do that, I think. And that's maybe one of the more intriguing situations when it comes to him, right? In that game against Colorado State, Nick Clifford is a guy that's going to get drafted and look very good, I think, at the NBA level. Derik Queen was switched on to him, guarding him, and did a really good job limiting him, slowing him down, forcing, I forget if it was a turnover or a missed shot. So he's got that too, in addition to the game winner, and that's a little bit overshadowed, was his defense in that game. But this is not someone who is an elite rim protector whatsoever. If you look at block percentage, which is a stat we use very much at the NBA level, an estimate of the percentage of opponent 2-point field goal attempts blocked by the player while they were on the floor. He's at 3.9%. So he's blocking 3.9% of field goal attempts, 2-pointers, when he is on the court. It's not an incredible number, in my opinion, when you look at some of the other players here, right? The other center out of Duke, who I think is in the running to be the first big man taken, and that's, I got this correct here. I want to try and pronounce these players correctly. It's Kamon, and then it's Maluwach from Duke, and he is someone who has about a 5.56% block percentage and is a better rebounder. He doesn't have the touch, to potentially be a court spacer. But look, Derik Queen doesn't necessarily have that right now yet. And I do think that is something that is going to be important for him if he's going to really kind of take it to the next level here. And he hasn't. And so that's the type of play from a guy like that. I'm pulling up Maluwach's, Maluwach is how you pronounce it, kind of with the spices there. Let me see. His block percentage actually is higher. It's 6.5%. That's pretty, that's a significant increase there when it comes to that. Did it go up? It actually went down in conference play. But, if you're looking to get that kind of big man that you think could start and fit and help you right away, what about someone like Johnny Broome out of Auburn, who I'm really, really high on? Now, look, he doesn't have the same kind of upside. He's 24 years old. That's not ideal, but this is someone who likely could step in right away and really help. While he's been at Auburn for 3 years, his block percentage is 8.9. 8.9 in the 2 years at Morehead State. Clearly too good for that kind of thing, right? He had a block percentage, get this one, of 11.5. His career block percentage in 5 years of college, which is wild, is 9.9. That's just insanely good. The past 2 years at Auburn, his junior and then first senior year, right? He led the country both years in block percentage. He's also a very, very good defensive rebounder. He's led college basketball in 3 years in terms of defensive rebounding percentage. Does he have the same insane upside as either of the two other guys we mentioned? Derik Queen in particular? No, he doesn't. And that's not going to be the case. And he's an older prospect. But he's someone that, at times has been able to take threes, doesn't hit them at a high rate, but hits them better than Queen has this season. But could he step in and be your starting center next year? Absolutely. The issue there with Johnny Broome is that I think that's someone that you would only take if you traded down, right? He's going to go somewhere between 15 to 25, somewhere in that range. He's not a lottery pick at that age. But that is going to be a highly productive NBA player in the future. So maybe this is a situation where if the Pelicans fall to 7 or 8 in the lottery, and the lottery's for the top 4 picks, if you're 4 and the worst case happens, and you probably won't see that, do you then maybe go after a Johnny Broome trade down in that sort of thing? And I think the answer to that very much could be and should be a yes. But Derik Queen, just because he's such a project, doesn't give you what you need, has higher upside probably than Carlo Makovich does, but would it be better to draft someone else and just play Carlo Makovich and not hope that Derik Queen pans out? Let me know what you think about any of the prospects I just talked about in the comments down below. So coming up next, we're going to spend the next 2 segments on tanking, because watching that game the other night between the Philadelphia 76ers and the Pelicans, that's annoying. That's an annoying game, isn't it? Let's talk about that and what the NBA can do. It's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like watching basketball live. The energy of the crowd, the sound of the sneakers on the hardwood, maybe even a celebrity sighting courtside. And if you want to catch a game in person, Game Time makes getting tickets easier than ever. Or maybe just next season for the Pelicans here. But yeah, even when the games aren't great, it's just fun being in there in the atmosphere of everything. So Game Time's new feature, Game Time Picks, filters out all the fluff and shows you only the best deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time scrolling through thousands of tickets. So it's super easy to shop for tickets. There are amazing deals on huge matchups in every single market. And with the seat view before you buy and no surprise fees at checkout and a lowest price guaranteed, you can book with total confidence. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. Listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. You can also get Locked On Pelicans in your inbox. Just go over to LockedOnDaily.com, click on the Locked On Pelicans logo, subscribe. You're going to get Locked On Pelicans in your inbox every single day, as long as my internet is working, which it was not on Thursday night, which was super annoying. But we're back now. It's looking good. Blinking green as I look at the router over there. So go subscribe to Locked On Pelicans, the Locked On Pelicans newsletter over at LockedOnDaily.com. So let's talk about tanking, because that game against the Philadelphia 76ers with the Pelicans in the Smoothie King Center on Monday night, it's about as stinky of a matchup as you can get. No Tyrese Maxey, no Joel Embiid, no Paul George, no Quentin Grimes, who's played great since he's been traded from the Dallas Mavericks, which makes their deal and all that stuff that they've done this season look even worse. Just nothing good from that one. No Zion Williamson, no C.J. McCollum. The other injuries are there too, but look, let's, maybe Zion's got, that lower back contusion he's heard, or they're just holding him out. That's a rough one for people to spend money and go to the game on if you're looking for high level play. And that's what you are, right? Look, there's more to an NBA game than just going and watching good players. It's the atmosphere of it. It's going with friends. It's being part of it. It's all that stuff. Don't get me wrong. But this isn't a great product for people. And I know a lot of people season tickets, and basically none of them went on Monday night, because why would you? And so if you're not going, you're not spending money on concessions, on merchandise, all of that stuff. It's not good for the NBA. And when you look at kind of what's going on in the NBA right now, it's rough. And there's a couple of teams in particular that I think are really pushing it to a certain degree. Look, there's teams like the Pelicans who are just bad because there's injured, and they don't really have a choice but to be bad, truthfully, right? This is what this is. The Washington Wizards are just bad. They're rebuilding. They're trying to get better. The goal is, if you're bad enough and you get good draft picks, that you get better, because those guys are talented, and that's how you turn it around. Kind of same for Charlotte, right? But then you look at Utah, who has a good amount of talent on the roster, and a recent all-star in Larry Markkinen, and they're barely playing him. It's actually very strange, and to the point where the Utah Jazz were just fined recently $100,000 for not making Markkinen available in certain games against the Wizards and other games, quote, was what the NBA said. And there's a player participation policy that has been instituted. So you don't shut players down and you get fined otherwise. But here's the thing. To the Utah Jazz, you think $100K matters when their owner's got a lot of money and they're trying to get Cooper Flagg? If you get Cooper Flagg, or even Dylan Harper, let's say, do you care about that $100,000 fine? Absolutely not. Now, their next fine might be $250,000, but now all of a sudden, what you're getting is even weirder and, in my opinion, worse. What the Jazz, and then Toronto has been doing this with Scotty Barnes, is They're playing their guys and then basically just sitting them. They might play in the first half and then they sit for the second half. So technically they played, and then for whatever reason, you're like, nope, that's not going to happen. You know, what Toronto is often doing is playing these guys a minute or two into the fourth quarter and then sitting them and playing undrafted guys. Look at the Toronto Raptors with Brandon Ingram. This is the longest ankle injury in history, it feels like, for him, because he's not going to play this year. And they just announced an update that he's going to be out for at least 10 more days. Look, if you're Toronto fans, that can be disappointing. So you're seeing teams do some really funky things, let's call it, that are probably, in my opinion, really skirting what it should be allowable or not. And, you know, when you get a game like the Pelicans have coming up against Charlotte, right, where like, look, for the standings, the reverse standings, that one's kind of impactful here. And maybe you have a team like the Philadelphia. Look, again, the Pelicans are in bad position because they're bad. And they have legitimate injuries. Utah could be playing guys more. Toronto, with the collection of talent they have, could be playing more guys and potentially winning some games, and they don't want to do that. Philadelphia 76ers have legitimate injuries. You know, Embiid, Paul George, even Maxey there. But Quentin Grimes being sat for rest. When you look at them in the standings, their pick is top 4 protected, and it goes to OKC if they don't land in the top 6. They're currently tied for 5th with the Brooklyn Nets. Both those teams have 23 wins. New Orleans at 4 has 20. Charlotte is at 18 here. Philly, absolutely, under all circumstances, right, needs to have their pick fall into the top 6. Otherwise, what a waste of a season here. And keep that in mind, because that's going to get to a point that I want to talk about in the next segment. Well, maybe we'll talk about it here, but keep that in mind for a second. I do think the NBA needs to do something about this, because I do think we're going to see some of the worst and most egregious tanking. I think we are seeing that this year, and I don't think that's good for the league. And I don't like to get into the ratings, the money, all that. I think that talk is very overrated and dumb, but you do want teams to try and be competitive and do all that. Now, it's not helped by the fact that this is a very good and deep draft. Reading an article on ESPN, when you look at top number 1 picks by WARP WARP projections, which is wins above replacement players. So basically, if you were to put just an average player in there instead of this guy, how much better is this player? Zion Williamson was actually one with the highest WARP of 5.1 for an first overall pick. Anthony Davis was 2 at 4.8. They're projecting Cooper Flagg to be a 4.6, which is over Kyrie Irving, Blake Griffin, Karl Anthony Towns, even Victor Wembanyama, at least in his rookie year. That's how impactful Cooper Flagg can be. And I would not be shocked if someone like Dylan Harper is up there, or Ace Bailey as well. So there's reasons for these teams to tank, certainly. But there's also, you know, we haven't seen the team with the worst record get the number 1 overall pick in a minute here. I forget exactly when that was the case, because let's see, do I have that number in front of me? I do not. Someone might be able to put it in the comments down below. But they need to do something about this, because it's bad. So here's 5 ways that I want to look at it that ESPN put out that I think is kind of interesting. Let's talk about those 5 ways they can combat tanking, but ultimately tell you what they probably need to do. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the number 1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. Become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. Comment down below if you are an everydayer. And don't forget about Locked On Saints. Ross Jackson making sense of everything black and gold over at the Locked On Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's get into, can you fix tanking? Because I don't think this is good for anybody. And look, it's part of it. It's part of it. Sometimes a team doesn't have a choice but to be bad, and there's nothing you can do about it. I think the Pelicans are an example of this. They're not just shutting guys down like the Utah Jazz are, like the Toronto Raptors are, or anything like that. Might be doing it a little bit right now, but for the most part, they've been playing their guys, right? CJ's playing. They're trying to actively win games when other teams don't look like they are. So what are things the NBA can do, and ESPN has 5 ideas, and let's go through this a little bit here. So first is flatten the lottery odds even more. You know, it used to be like this in the NBA where all non-playoff teams had the same chance to move up, and that changed in the early 90s when Orlando Magic won the top spot in 92 and 93. And when they got it the second year, they drafted Shaq, and they were 41-40 that year. Does that truly feel really fair? Probably not at this sort of thing. And maybe then you also have teams that are like fighting for a playoff or play-in spot and go, no, if we're going to get the same odds as the worst team, let's just miss the playoffs here. And while we had a fun season, we sold our fans on it, we kept the arena packed till the very end, now we're shutting it down. And I don't think that's a good solution at all. Another one they put out, which I had not heard before, was count wins instead of losses after the All-Star break. So right now, teams are rewarded for losing as many games as possible during the final 2 months of the season. But what if you turn that on its head? I'm reading quote for quote here. By making a portion of the second half schedule post All-Star break of the final 20 games, for an example, work in opposite fashion, the most wins during that stretch would determine the lottery odds. It would obviously create a system where bad teams would have every reason to play hard and play their stars. You know, if you take last season, for example, you kind of change the draft order completely when it comes to this sort of thing. And I think that could be a really interesting way to do it. But here's the thing. That would be only really good, in my opinion, for teams that are pushing for the play-in spot. Does that help New Orleans? Does that penalize a team like New Orleans right now? And if you look at it, those teams that don't make the play-in would be right now Dallas and Portland, and you're going to potentially give them the best chance. You know, now I haven't looked at what their records are and all of this, but you'd be looking at someone like Phoenix or Dallas potentially having some of the best odds because they made a stupid trade, you know, at a time, but they're still pushing for a play-in spot. And that to me doesn't really seem ideal. It seems to benefit teams going for a play-in spot that don't end up getting it. So I don't love that idea. The next one they say is actually very interesting in my opinion, but it only impacts a certain area. And frankly, I don't see why you couldn't put this in. And that is rework or remove protections on draft picks that are traded. The Dallas Mavericks a couple of years ago just tanked at the end of the 2023 season because their pick was top 10 protected. And they got lucky that it just fell within there. They got that center that they needed, and he helped and was a big part of their run to the NBA Finals a year later. They were fined $750,000 for what they did. And then they made the finals the next year. Do you think that team cared about a near $1 million fine? No. Right? This year, would it have impacted the Philadelphia 76ers? Potentially, right? This season, they hope to keep their top 6 pick. But they've also been derailed by injuries. And so it's not just them doing like an egregious tank job with this sort of thing. So maybe it's you just, instead of making things top 6 protected, it's top 4 or not. Philly doesn't really have a chance at the top 4 spot, I don't think. So they'd be relying on worse odds to maybe make something happen, or they could have pushed for a playoff spot. But they're injured. They're bad too. They weren't going to have a chance at making a top playoff spot, a top 10 seed. So they likely would be tanking either way. Now, should you get rid of lottery pick protections and all that and just make it top 4? I don't really see an issue with that. And it would impact the trade market in a really interesting way. And I truthfully think probably like slow it down some. And you would almost penalize some creative GMs. Don't forget that you saw David Griffin essentially trade a first round pick twice because part of it was top 14 protected and then the other part wasn't. And you could kind of build in deals around those sorts of things. So I think that's an interesting idea there too. Just that maybe the league should look at doing, but it could then massively impact the trade market when it comes to everything. There's 2 more here, and then there's a 4th that I'll mention. Or sorry, a 6th bonus one that I'll mention. Have lottery odds determined by how those teams fare against each other. I don't like this idea at all. Teams on the fringes of the play-in games and all of that are going to have a very big advantage for this sort of thing, right? Beat all those teams, then lose in the play-in game, and now that you're part of the lottery, you have the best odds for it. Don't love that whatsoever when it comes to that sort of thing. 5 is their most interesting idea, and yeah, maybe this is it. Enforce the current rules. maybe the fines just need to be put up dramatically. And so that would get around guys being rested if they are healthy without a legitimate injury, with what the Jazz have done with Lauri Markkanen. But that doesn't stop them from playing 10 minutes per game, 5 minutes per game, playing them 1 minute in the fourth quarter and sitting those guys. So there's still going to be ways around that sort of thing. But truthfully, this is probably one of the best ways the NBA can do it, is just raise the money. Maybe make it $1 million fine as a first thing. And I think that would actually maybe have an impact. That's going to hit your wallet and your account balances harder than a $100,000 fine would. They're never going to be able to legislate in, like, you got to play guys in the fourth quarter and those sorts of things. And you don't want them doing that either. Because look, sometimes it's just in a team's best interest to fight for draft positioning. And sometimes teams are just going to be bad, and every team in this lottery, at the top, is not necessarily just outright tanking. I don't think the Pelicans are. Maybe a little bit, yeah, but not as bad as Utah or Charlotte. And Washington is just a bad team. The goal of a lottery is, of a draft is, this team's bad. Let's give them the best talent in the draft to hopefully make them better and increase competitiveness around the NBA. One of the other ways that I think you've heard some interesting discussion around eliminating tanking is the wheel. I got to look this up. NBA tanking. Let's see. NBA draft wheel. I haven't thought about this in a minute here, but reinventing the wheel. This goes back to like 2015 and right around then. Literally Google NBA tanking wheel, and Mike Zarin presents modified NBA draft lottery reform proposal of, like, there's wheel systems where here is your picks fall in a range of 3 or 6, and every year you're going to be in one of those. You can make it slightly more random or less random, but it's really interesting. So it's designed to basically just, you're going to know where your draft spot is. So there are a number, basically it's like every 30 years you will get the number 1 overall pick, or every 10 years you'll have a chance at a top 3 pick somewhere in that range. You might get 3 every 10 years or 2 or 1, but you would be in that range. It's a really, really interesting idea. But there are some problems with that, right? Elite prospects, if you don't want to go pro right away, and now with some of the NIL money, maybe you wait so you avoid a bad team. It's like next year the Celtics are going to have a top 3 pick. That's when I'm going to go pro. I don't think that'll happen too much, but you could kind of time it for your desired market and all of those sorts of things. And if you have teams that were bad before the introduction of the wheel, they wouldn't get out of that anytime soon if they weren't in there. And you can't really alter the system whatsoever. So it's an interesting idea with it, and it's something you should take a look at. Maybe we can go into this over the summer, particularly if things don't go the Pelicans' way in the lottery. Worth keeping in mind, though, the league's got to do something about tanking, because, look, I liked being in the Smoothie King Center on Monday, but the game sucked. It did. You want to see good players play. Wasn't fully either team's fault, but I still don't like it. Let me know what you think would fix tanking in the comments down below. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. More prospects tomorrow. Let's look at some guards in the NBA draft. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I'll be back with y'all next time.